All right. Hello and welcome to our second ARM templates live stream. We are super happy to be back to share some information about, ARM templates and how to make you an ARM templates rockstar. And today, Martin and I will talk a little bit about nested and linked ARM templates. If you have no clue what this means, no worries. This is exactly why you're here for, and we will share what we know with you in the next approx 45 minutes. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A window on the right-hand side, and we're happy to answer, or at least try to answer, everything you are asking. So let's quickly introduce ourselves. This time we start with Martin.
Yeah, a little unexpected, but my name is Martin Ehrnst, and I work for a company in Norway called Intility. So we are a managed service provider, so working a lot with customers onboarding to Azure, and then also working a lot with templates and that kind of stuff. So Azure User Group Norway founder, and also race car driver, to be, for those who didn't know. So Marcel, what about you?
Yeah, by the way, maybe there are some more unexpected things happening today, Martin, just so to let you know. Yeah, so I'm Marcel. I work for SoftwareOne, and me and my team, we help customers with everything Microsoft Azure and M365. Myself, I'm mainly focusing on everything Azure management, so I help customers onboarding to the Azure platform, where I discuss and take care about things such as governance or management of resources by using code such as ARM templates. And beside that, I'm a regular speaker and blogger, and I also run 2 conferences with my partner, which is Experts Live in Europe and in Switzerland. All right, so what can you expect today? Oh, there's another slide, so I'm surprised myself now. So before we jump into the agenda, this is a lookout on what's still coming next week and the week after. So last week we talked about specific ARM template functions, variables, parameters, dependencies, and so on. So a little bit more complex stuff. Today we talk about nested and linked ARM templates. In a week we talk about something brand new, which is deployment scripts. And then in 2 weeks from now, on October 26th, we will talk about how to release code or manage code in a repository and then release it in a controlled way using pipelines. So definitely make sure you don't miss the 2 upcoming live streams here by just following this link. All right, so today we will just very quickly look at the challenges or the behavior of single ARM templates that we covered last week. And then we'll dive into those, let's say, more advanced approaches to deploy ARM templates, which is nested templates and linked templates. And that's it for today. So that is just these 3 bullets. All right. So single template deployments, what does that actually mean? So it's a very simple approach, because you have one JSON file. In this JSON file, you describe all your resources you want to deploy. You can use parameters, variables, functions in a very simple way. And it's a great approach if you deploy simple services. So let's say if you deploy a service that needs 2 or 3 resources, then that's pretty much okay, because your file will not be super comprehensive. It will not be too much code inside your file. So this is fine. It's still readable. It's okay to author. And then what's also interesting is that if you have a single file, you can only deploy that single file to one scope. So if you remember from one of the first live streams, we talked about different scopes that you can use to deploy your ARM templates, which could be a resource group. So for instance, if you want to deploy resources, they normally go into a resource group, right? But then there's also other scopes you can use, for instance, a subscription. So you can deploy on subscription level, for instance, if you want to create a resource group by using an ARM template. Then you need to go one level up to the subscription level, deploy your code from there to create a resource group. And now we have a little bit of a thing because using one single ARM template can only scope to one level, which means you can either deploy to the subscription level or to the resource group level, but you cannot mix and match. That doesn't work, all right? And then, of course, if you have your single file ARM template, the reusability of your code is not so great. It is possible, so if it's totally parameterized, but of course, if you want to define another service that consists of other components, you need to start from scratch. All right, so what can we do now? We can now go for one of these two more advanced approaches, and this is done by decomposing our ARM template or our ARM template deployment. And the approaches are pretty much the same. There's one big difference, and you can see it here. So if you go for the nested templates approach, that means that you will still have one single file. So it's still a single file ARM template deployment. But it actually does multiple deployments that are orchestrated. So it's not just a single deployment, but it's multiple deployments that are orchestrated in one single file. And then that means that you can have deployments to different scopes. So for instance, if you have this one file which contains two nested templates for two deployments, means that one deployment can go to the subscription level, the second one could go to the resource group level, for instance. All right, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we have the second approach, which is linked templates. And linked templates is actually, or means that you link or you start linking templates, which means that you will have not only one file, but multiple files. So you now totally decompose your single ARM template and spread your code across multiple files. And then, of course, you need some file that does all the orchestration and understands what other files to actually use for deployments. So you have an orchestrated deployment based on multiple files. That's the only difference. All the rest is more or less the same. All right. So let's dive a little bit deeper into nested templates now. So as I mentioned, nested template still uses this single file approach or the single ARM template. But then inside of this, you nest multiple so-called deployment templates. And that means that we then differentiate between the parent template, which is like the main template. And this main template orchestrates all the deployment by triggering one or multiple deployments that are nested inside the same file. Sounds a bit weird, but we'll see afterwards in the demo that it's actually simpler than it sounds now. All right. So now how is this done? This is done by changing our code a little bit. Now you remember from last time that every time we describe a resource in our code, we defined the resource type. So we defined, well, we want to deploy a Microsoft.storage/storage accounts resource, for instance. And that's fine and works for a single template. But now, as we talk about nested templates, we need to trigger a deployment of a nested template. And that means that we need to use a special type of resource, which is Microsoft.resources/deployments, which just means, well, inside this ARM template that we deploy, we want to start another ARM template deployment. And then this triggers another deployment of another template. But this other template lives in the same file. It's just nested. This is why it's called nested templates. All right, so in your code, you will then have a template section, and this template section will contain the full nested ARM templates that you want to deploy. And of course, if you want to deploy more than one resource, you just create multiple deployments. All right. Good. As I already mentioned, this gives you a little bit more flexibility compared to single template deployments in a traditional way, because you can now have multiple deployments scoped or targeted to different scopes. So for instance, you can now have a nested ARM template that in the first step deploys a resource group to a subscription. And then right afterwards, you could deploy a storage account or any other resource inside this resource group. This is something that is not possible if you go for the traditional approach, because then you only have one scope. But here we actually need two scopes for the two different deployments. So this gives you additional flexibility, but of course, it also makes it a little bit more complex. And you will see that in a bit when Martin will do the demo, because nested templates can be a bit complex to understand because of, imagine you have a template inside a template, which means you have two parameter sections, you have two variable sections, you have two resources sections. And if you deploy multiple resources, you might even have more than just two, like 5 or even 10 parameter section. And that makes it a little bit more hard to understand where you actually are, where you need to change a parameter or something. This is a little bit trickier. And something that's also important is the so-called expression evaluation, because we now have a nested template, and in the nested template, we can also use parameters and variables and functions and so on. And now the question is, if I use a parameter value inside of a nested template, does it actually just use the value or does it resolve the value from within the nested template or from the parent template? And this is your choice. So you can configure your code and define if you want to use an inner expression evaluation, which means that everything is resolved inside the nested template. So for instance, if you use a parameter, if you call a function, this happens inside the nested template. Or if you want to use an outer expression evaluation, which means if you use a parameter in a nested template, it will actually look in the parent orchestration template for that value. Sounds a bit complex. Yeah, I agree with you. And this is why we now jump into the demo, and Martin will show you how this works. So, Martin, the stage is yours.
Thanks. And I agree too. This is quite complex. So just let me just share my screen here. So, for those of you who attended one of the prior, or at least the last live stream, we are continuing to build up on top of the same resource deployments there. So it is storage accounts that are being deployed because we are looking to inform you on how to use ARM templates and not how to deploy complex systems onto Azure. So we're using all the functionality that exists, but we are still deploying storage accounts. I have put down one example on nested templating. So this will be available in the repository on GitHub later. And like Marcel said, now we have the possibility to deploy resources at multiple scopes. So the first thing that I've added in here is a schema. So I've changed the schema to be a subscription schema type, and that will make us available to create a storage account on the subscription that we are connected to. So with this template, I have expanded one of the previous demos that we had, and I have added a new schema around the existing template that we had. And now I am also wanted to have a resource group name property passed into the main, or let's say orchestrating template. So we're going in and we are first deploying the resource group. And like Marcel said, now we need to create what is a new resource type. So, or not a new resource type, but deployments are resources on ARM or Azure Resource Manager themselves. So that means that it is, once the deployment actually reach Azure, it is Azure Resource Manager that are responsible for this deployment. So it will have one deployment for the resource group, and then it will create a new deployment for the nested template. And in this case, I want the nested deployment to depend on the resource group that we are creating here. So ARM will then wait for the first resource group to be, or the first deployment, to be honest, to be created or to finish, and then it will orchestrate and run the new deployment with the nested template. So it isn't until it is a lot of code, or at least lines of code, before we actually get down to the templates that, or the nested template, because like Marcel said, we have to pay attention to where we are doing expression evaluation. And in this case, I have specified that I want expression to be set to inner scope, or I want the expression to be within my nested template. The default setting here is outer, so then all expression evaluation will be basically at this level, so the main orchestrating template. But now all deployments that are happening down from here will evaluate the expressions within the nested template. This is actually our resources or storage account deployments. But I am only using one parameter file, so I am expecting to have the parameters for both the deployments at the main level, or the orchestrating template, and then I'm basically passing from the main template and into the nested one by referencing the parameters from my main template. So we will need to, in this case, we will need to specify the parameters 3 times, to be honest. First for the main template, and then the values for it for the nested templates, and also what parameters is expected by the nested template alone. So in this case, the reason for doing inner evaluation expression is that I am using variables here. So to create storage accounts, I am using a variable within my nested template that is dependent on a copy function. So we have, if you remember from the last stream, we are creating multiple storage accounts with a copy function. And this is actually refers to a variable within my nested template, and then I will need to express the evaluation from an inner scope. And if this doesn't make sense, I totally understand, but once you start working with it, it will be at least somewhat more readable. But it is a reason for link templates to actually exist, but because you don't need to have all this in one single file. And remember, this is only for a storage account. So if you want to add in, I don't know, multiple resource types within multiple nested templates within one main template, it will be pretty tough to read. But we can try it out and see if it actually works. It will create, I don't know, 4 or 5. First the resource group, and then we'll create 4 or 5 storage accounts. And we will have 2 separate deployments showing within my Azure tenants or in my Azure subscription. But first off, we will see that it has a nesting template, which is my first one. So this will be the resource group, and then we will see it will start a new deployment. Now, it will just finish, but it will start 2 deployments. Going back here, so the nesting template, we will first create a resource group, and then it will create the resources itself. Shows up. Here we have the storage accounts. So at the subscription level, we will see the subscription scoped deployment, and within the resource group, we can see deployments for the storage accounts, which is this one. So that's what I had for this demo, Marcel.
Yeah, I think that's really important to understand that in the very end, if you check the Azure portal and that to see what happens in Azure, that you can actually see that there's multiple deployments happening that are, of course, orchestrated by this nested template approach, but it's actually individual deployments, right? And you can see that in the portal on subscription level or on the resource group level or wherever you made the deployment. So that's the thing. And what we've also seen is that especially if you use the inner expression evaluation, it gets super complex because you, of course, need to feed in the parameter values, and then again on the nested template, accept the parameter values that are fed into the nested template. And well, it also always happened to me that if I want to change a parameter and I'm totally in the wrong parameter section and I messed up everything.
Yeah, so this only works because I figured out how to do this once. So I will never be able to do this once more. So let's continue.
So let's continue to the more, well, still complex, but not so complex approach.
Yeah.
And well, I'm honest here. If we work with customers, we normally always suggest to go with a linked template approach, not with a nested. Well, in case there's not like a killer argument that forces us to use nested. So we always go for linked if somehow possible.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see what linked templates are. I mean, the basic principle between nested.
You need to share your screen again.
Oh yeah, that helps. Thank you so much. There we go. No. That's the thing. If you're the operator of the live meeting and the presenter at the same time, this can happen. All right. So talking about linked templates now, we will immediately see that the approach is exactly the same. So we also somehow deploy multiple resources from multiple individual deployments that are somehow orchestrated. But the difference here is that we actually decompose our code into multiple files, because you have seen only to deploy like this very simple, well, I cannot even call it a service, this very simple thing that Martin deployed, which is just a resource group and some storage accounts with a copy loop. If I counted correctly, or if I saw correctly, it was 130 lines of code or something. And yeah, of course, if you imagine you want to deploy whatever, a service that consists of 30 different Azure resources, this will be like hell, right? So what we do here is we decompose everything into multiple files. So every single deployment lives in its own file. So there's no more nesting. We still use that Microsoft resources /deployments resource type to trigger the deployment, but then afterwards the code does not live in that parent template. So it will actually look like this. As you can see, we have multiple so-called resource templates. So the three examples here, I just picked like some resource types. So one to deploy a storage account, one to deploy an automation account, one to deploy a virtual network, but this could of course be anything. And then you have the my service JSON file, which is the deployment template that orchestrates everything. And as we've seen before, of course, we can use a parameters file here as well. If we now start the deployment of this my service JSON template, it will then trigger the different resource templates. But that code lives in its own file. Now, what's the thing here? So let's first talk about the resource templates. The resource templates are normally, well, at least we use it like that. We create the resource templates in a way that they're highly reusable. So we want to use the same resource templates no matter what service I'm actually deploying. So that just means for every service where I need a storage account, I want to use the exact same resource template that just deploys my storage account. So I want to reuse all of my resource templates over and over and over again. The only thing that changes is the deployment template. So they are normally highly reusable. They are, because of that, of course, totally parameterized. And over time, if I start building up my linked ARM templates approach, my resource templates repository will grow over time, and I will become much faster in the future when I just reuse my existing resource templates. Now, of course, that means if I create my resource template that I will need to test it properly to see if that resource that it should deploy really deploys. So we just normally test the resource templates each individual. And once we have those, we go to the deployment template, which will then orchestrate the deployment. All right. And this file is more or less the same that Martin showed you in the demo. The only difference is that we now access the nested code from the last demo by using a URI, because the code now doesn't live in our deployment template, but it lives in another file. And for that, we use this template link property, which has two sub-properties, which is path. The path is actually the URI to that resource template file. And we can also have a content version. This is optional. This just means if you deploy your deployment template, it will check if the resource templates that you defined in the path value are actually existing, if they are available. And if you also define the content version, it will also check the version of the resource template file. So with that, you can actually expect a specific version of the resource template. And for instance, if someone made a change and did proper versioning, then of course that version might be higher and your deployment template would still look for an older version, which would mean if you deploy it again, that it will fail. But the versioning is optional. Now, what is important here, this URI needs to be publicly accessible, because the deployment template or the Azure Resource Manager that deploys the template needs to have access to these files. So that means that you can place them somewhere. So for instance, in a GitHub repository that is publicly available, or on an Azure Storage account that is publicly available. It doesn't actually matter. Now, of course, depending on the type of resource templates you have, you don't want to share your templates with the whole world. And that also means that you might want to protect them. So this is just an example. We very often use storage accounts when we fully automate the deployments. Then we copy over all the resource templates to that storage account. And the storage account has a public endpoint that is needed. But then we use a so-called private blob container, which means that you can only get access to this container when you authenticate first. And in this case, the Azure Resource Manager that deploys the deployment template needs to authenticate. And for that, you normally use SaaS tokens. So that means once you have your storage account ready, you have your container ready, you will create a storage account SaaS token, and then you use that in your deployment, and then just add that to the path value of your resource templates. And then, of course, you can just hand the SaaS token in as a parameter value to your deployment template, or, of course, better store that value in an Azure Key Vault and get it from there. All right, so what we normally do, and we will talk about that a little bit later in exactly 2 weeks, if we go for well-structured deployments of ARM code, which means if we use pipelines, for instance, then we do all of this automatically. So we provision the storage account, we copy over all the resource templates, we create a SaaS token, and then we create the deployment itself, which uses the resource templates, and at the very end, we just delete everything again so that it's gone afterwards. But of course, this is only convenient if you really automate everything. All right. Now, also a bit tricky is this, and this can also be tricky in nested templates, by the way, but I specifically mentioned it here because here it will hit you. If you have linked templates, that means that imagine you deploy a web application which consists of a database and a web app, right? And of course, you deploy the database first. So from your deployment template, you trigger the SQL database resource template, which will deploy that database. And then, of course, you know that when you create a database in Azure, you will have a property, which is a connection string that you might need afterwards to deploy your web application because you want to configure it, right? Now, how can you access that? You could access that by using outputs and parameters, which means for the resource template that deploys the SQL database, you define an output which gives back the connection string value. And then, of course, you need to access and reference to that value before you make your next deployment in your deployment template, and then use that value as a parameter value for the web app that you want to deploy, and then use that in there. Sounds complex? Yeah, it actually is a little bit complex. You definitely have to play with this to fully understand that procedure, but I hope, at least in theory, this makes somehow sense. All right, so let's see what kind of demos Martin prepared for this. Martin, you're still on mute, just in case.
I haven't started talking yet.
Okay.
Sorry about that. But yeah, as you said, I should have prepared something, and I believe I have prepared a little bit at least. So, like Marcel said, this is not exactly the same, the linked approach, but it is at least referenceable to the nested approach. You have kind of like the main template, and again, this one is also scoped to my subscription. So I can provide the provision the resource group, and I'm going to do the exact same thing that we did on the last demo, on the previous demo. But we are now using a link, or we are putting in a URI to a publicly available ARM template. So if I just hide it, so remove that a little bit for a second so we can see it a little bit more. So again, this one is the resource group, and it will be deployed to my subscription. Then we have, again, the new or the deployment resource itself, which again, it is dependent on the resource group being created first. Scrolling a little bit down, we can see that we now within the deployment, we have what is called a template link. So here we are providing the URI for what I want to deploy. So this one is the copy example that we have in one of our previous the last live stream. So this is now available on GitHub. So if I go into 4.0 -copy here, you can see I want to deploy this ARM template, and it has a lot of comments, and JSON doesn't exactly like that, but it works. So this is what I want to deploy. I want to deploy all of the storage accounts that I am passing in as parameters. So let's say I want 5, and we are going to use this URI. This is the same URI that we have specified in my new template. This is the same. And we could, of course, pass that in as a parameter as well. And the cool thing about having this approach is, at least this is what we use it for internally, is that each and every team that are responsible for, let's say, network or storage or SQL or whatever, they are also responsible for creating the templates that the rest of the organization can use. So when some of us needs to deploy the latest SQL that is configured and ready for customer production, for example, we always know that that template is backed by our SQL team, and it will be supported by them only by accessing the URL or specifying a version if that's needed. And furthermore, we need to pass in the parameters for the link template. But here we don't need to specify if you want to evaluate the expression with inner or outer scope. It will just pay attention to the parameters that you send in, and it will evaluate the actual parameters required within this URI or within this template, and it will, if you don't have the required parameters, it will throw an error. But it won't matter if you are, it won't care if it's inner or outer scope. And also, you can have outputs from both of the deployments. So it's still 2 deployments here. It is the storage account, and it is the new deployment that is orchestrated by ARM. So let's see if it works. And again, we should have a new deployment started on this subscription. So this one, the linked main template, is now deploying, and it will deploy the resource group before it starts the new deployments for the storage accounts. This is what the resource was deployed in the first template, and this is what is found to be deployed from the GitHub repository.
So we again see multiple deployments here.
Yeah, nested deployments, to be honest. So yeah, just with a link instead of yeah, that is correct. So basically the same, but a little bit more user friendly to see just the URIs for the templates to be deployed. I think that's what I had. Yeah,
that's great. I have an additional question here, because the thing is, if you go for the linked template approach, you need to make your resource templates accessible by a public URI, and depending on how your processes look like, depending on your security, this can be a little bit painful. And I heard some rumors that there's something new in the make at Microsoft that makes this a little bit easier. And this thing is called template spec.
Yes, that is correct.
Do you want to share a little bit about that?
I can share what I know. Yeah, I can share what I know. I don't know much, but it is a new, let's call it a resource to help with the complexity of sharing templates within your organization. So basically, you will have the option to have a template or a template store within your tenant, and then you can just reference, instead of the full URI, you can reference just a path to your internal organization. That is what's being said, and that's what's being demoed. So I don't know what the end goal of this service is, but at least it is to simplify this and have a more secure way of sharing your internal templates. It is available for a private preview. So let's see, ARM template. Yeah, so sign up for the waitlist, basically.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense, because it might make your deployment process a little bit easier, more controlled, and maybe also a bit more private.
Yeah, but the thing is that you can see that the template spec itself is a resource of some type. So it is something that you need to pay attention to. I don't think you can just take all your existing templates and call them template specs. It has to be within some kind of structure.
Yeah. So, but definitely something that we need to keep on the radars, template specs.
Yep.
All right.
You're free to go. You're free to start sharing your screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I will. There we go. Thanks for that demo. And this means that we're almost at the end for today. So to quickly sum this up, nested templates versus linked templates. Here you can see like a very quick and simplified comparison, but you can see nested template uses the single file approach, whereas linked templates uses the multiple files approach that we've just seen in the demo. Well, deployment itself is much easier for nested templates compared to linked templates, but of course the authoring experience, at least to me, is much harder for nested templates compared to linked templates. The reusability of code, well, this is definitely where linked ARM templates have its big advantage, because you can reuse your resource templates all the time for all of your services that you're actually deploying, right? And both approaches actually support to deploy to multiple scopes. So this is the flexibility you have with both. So it's up to you to decide. Definitely try out both approaches and see what makes more sense for your use cases, what you feel more comfortable with, right? I think that's also very important. All right, if you want to, well, reuse Martin's code so that you don't have to scratch your head to get this working, go to this URL. This will give you access to Martin's repository. Thanks for sharing, Martin, and for all the hard work of preparing this. And as I already mentioned, make sure you're back next week, October 19th. We will talk about deployment scripts, fantastic thing. And then the week after, we'll talk about code release using pipelines. Yeah, make sure you check out this shortened URL down there to get access to the details. Okay, cool. And now again, same as last week, we have this this offer from Microsoft Norway. If you promise to visit those two links to learn a little bit more about Azure DevOps, how you can use pipelines to release your code, you can read it now or come back in 2 weeks and see our live stream. But then also make sure you join the Azure Heroes program and collect some badges. And then if you promise that you do that, we will draw a winner of today's attendees, and the lucky winner that we will, of course, automatically raffle with some magic script will receive a nice swag pack from Microsoft Norway. So thank you, Microsoft, for sponsoring that swag pack. I have no clue what's in there. I'm not sure, Martin, if you know.
No, I don't know.
No, okay. So a surprise. It will be a surprise.
Yeah.
All right, that's it. Thanks for your time. I hope that was interesting and informational for you. And we're looking forward to next week and hope to have you back. Thanks, Martin, for all the demos, and I wish you a very nice week. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.